Hey, Polly.
Hey Greg, how are you?
I am feeling righteous today.
Well, all right.
That's only because that's the first word I can think of with the word right in it. Because today we have ACLU of Rhode Island Executive Director Stephen Brown on.
Oh,
So
we'll have to be on our best behavior.
that's right. We're going to be talking about all sorts of rights and Bill of Rights and all the work that they're doing that people know and don't know about.
All right, I can't wait. I love being right.
There we go. Nothing wrong with being right. And ACLU's got their eye on that. All right. So without further ado, today joining us on Totally Preventable, we have Stephen Brown, the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of Rhode Island. Stephen, how are you doing today?
I'm fine. Thanks for inviting me.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. To start like we normally do, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Sure. So I've been executive director of the ACLU here for a couple decades now. I got into it actually when I was in college. My initial interest was in becoming a journalist, and from my interest in that, I started reading about the First Amendment, freedom of the press. And from there, it just blossomed into an interest in the Bill of Rights generally, which is the ACLU's bread and butter, defending the Bill of Rights. And I started volunteering for the ACLU actually that early on. And I've been working in one capacity or another for the ACLU ever since.
That is awesome.
It is awesome. Can you share like the core mission of the ACLU and what you're all about?
Yeah, sure. So first, it's important to recognize that we are an affiliate of a national organization, the National ACLU, which most people have heard about. But each affiliate gets to deal with the issues in its own state. But the mission, both at the local level and the national level, is the same. And that is what I just mentioned. It is to promote and protect the Bill of Rights to the United States Constitution, which covers, a few basic areas. I think the one that people are most familiar with are First Amendment rights, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. But the Bill of Rights also provides a number of other protections, like due process of law, which means that the government has to make use of fair procedures before it takes away your liberty or your property, tries to put you in jail. There are procedures that have to be followed in order to ensure fairness. A third major area is what's known as equal protection of the laws, equality, making sure that the government does not discriminate against individuals unfairly on a whole array of categories. We're familiar with some of the obvious ones: race, religion, sex, and so on, but it covers a lot more than that. And then finally, an issue that we also deal with, it's not directly in the Bill of Rights, but one can infer it from some of the particular provisions, are rights to privacy and a right to open government, which sometimes can be in conflict, but they are also very key fundamental rights that the ACLU defends.
I am embarrassed to say that I don't think I remember all of the Bill of Rights.
No.
Bad me. I know the first one.
Yeah.
But that's it. That's bad. But I did
Uh,
that test back in high school. I know I did that.
it's the most important one.
That's
That's a good.
right. What are some of the key issues that the ACLU of Rhode Island is currently focused on addressing, both at state and national levels?
Well, there's never a shortage of issues for the ACLU to handle here in Rhode Island or nationally. There are some that crop up all the time, and those are some of the major ones we're dealing with right now. Certainly with a major election coming up, voting rights is an extremely critical issue that we've been working on to make sure that elections are conducted fairly. We've put together a lot of Know Your Rights materials about voting rights and have been disseminating it across the state so people know what their rights are, both when they go to the voting polls and if they vote early or run into any sort of problems. A second major issue, and again, this is one that we deal with all the time, has to do with race discrimination, which shows up in so many different contexts. You not only have, some blatant issues of discrimination, but it shows up in criminal justice issues. It shows up in police misconduct. I'm sure we'll be getting into that some more as this conversation proceeds. But it's something that we do spend a lot of time on. A third major area that we're working on is sort of a newish one, and that has to do with civil liberties as they're affected by technology. This is now a new and growing issue and problem, for people who are concerned about privacy. We're now living in a surveillance society, and the ACLU is doing its best to try to fight back and push back against some of that, because I think it has major ramifications for what our society looks like in the future. The final one that I would mention, which is specifically about Rhode Island and one that we're spending a lot of time on because it will be appearing on the November 5th ballot here in Rhode Island. Before going into it, I should emphasize the ACLU is a strictly nonpartisan organization. We don't get involved in supporting or endorsing candidates, but we do get involved occasionally in ballot referenda campaigns. And that's true this coming November. There'll be a question on the ballot as to whether voters want to have the state hold a state constitutional convention. This is something that appears on the ballot every 10 years, and it is something that the ACLU is strongly opposed to. And we've been urging Rhode Islanders to vote against it. And the reason is we're concerned that by holding a constitutional convention, all of our state constitutional rights are up for grabs. And that's not a hypothetical concern. Rhode Island was the last state in the country to hold a state constitutional convention. It held one in 1986, almost 40 years ago. And that convention led to the passage of some really damaging amendments to civil rights and civil liberties. That convention, which ultimately approved amendments that were approved by the voters as well, because convention amendments go to the voters for approval or rejection. But the voters approved three, from our perspective, very troubling constitutional amendments to our state constitution. One had to do with the right to bail. This was a tough on crime era in the 1980s. And so the convention proposed and voters approved an amendment that significantly cut back on an individual's right to bail when they were charged with certain drug offenses. And that provision remains in our Constitution to this day. The convention also approved, and the voters approved, an amendment that expanded the universe of people who lost their right to vote because of a criminal record. And it actually took the General Assembly 20 years later to pass another constitutional amendment to undo the damage that the convention did with that one. And then the last one had to do with reproductive freedom, abortion rights. The convention came out and passed two constitutional amendments restricting abortion. One was an amendment declaring that life begins at conception. That one ultimately was defeated by the voters by a large margin, but they also approved a second amendment that went into the Constitution that says that our state constitution provides no rights whatsoever when it comes to abortion. So these all came out of a 1986 convention. We are deeply concerned that very similar hot button issues would happen if a convention were held again in 2026. All we have to do is look around the country, see about the battles over immigrants' rights, not just abortion rights, but immigrants' rights, LGBTQ rights, so many polarizing issues that it would be almost inevitable to see those issues discussed at a convention. And we're really hopeful that the voters will reject having a convention to make these things not happen.
Now, if a convention does happen, are amendments good or end for 10 years or to the next convention, or can they be voted against at any time?
Yeah, so the way it works is the convention meets for a period of time, and it's totally up to the convention delegates to decide how long they meet. In the 1960s, there was a convention. It lasted for almost 5 years, believe it or not. Another reason not to hold the convention, I would argue.
Yes.
But the way it works is the delegates meet, however, whatever the time frame is, they then propose amendments, they vote on them, and if a majority of the delegates support it, it then goes on the ballot for all the voters to vote on. If it gets approved, then it's in our Constitution. It's in our Constitution forever, unless and until it gets changed by another ballot process. So yeah, it is permanent action that that's taken from a convention.
Very.
Yes. Does the ACLU have, I believe I'm right on this, do they fight for unhoused people's rights?
Yes, we've been involved in a lot of litigation and a lot of legislation dealing with the rights of the homeless. The ACLU was very involved in helping passage of a law in, I believe it was 2012, the first law in the country that established a homeless bill of rights. And it needs some work. There are too many loopholes in it, and there have been efforts these past couple of years to strengthen it. But it was really an important measure at the time, and it remains an important measure, recognizing the dignity of people who are unhoused. And since then, we've been involved in other sorts of litigation over, attempts by cities and towns to destroy homeless encampments without any proper procedures. This is an ongoing issue in a number of communities across the state. And we've been working with a lot of the advocates, who are on the ground to help provide legal advice when they're dealing with those issues.
We attend a breakfast in our county for not just unhoused, but food insecure people. And I bring a box with stuff in it every week. And I have the homeless bill of rights in there as well that we pass out often because they are often losing their tents.
Yep.
So maybe I'll be contacting you because they recently took out their benches in front of the breakfast.
Well, that's fantastic what you're doing. It really is important. And yes, this is, it's really discouraging to see some of the backlash against people who, through no fault of their own, don't have a place to live. And instead of coming up with positive solutions, helping them, there's too often a punitive approach by public officials that does absolutely nothing to solve the problem. As you know, you get rid of an encampment, they're going to move somewhere else. It's not like you've solved anything. So it's very frustrating to see how some municipal officials have reacted to it, and we just have to keep fighting that.
It was also eye-opening how many people did not know about the homeless bill of rights. Showing the pamphlet and just seeing the eyes of people just buried their head right in it, just trying to grasp as much information as possible because there was no knowledge of it. So
yeah, that's a good point. And it's true of civil rights generally and civil liberties. People often are not aware of their rights, and sometimes it's only by happenstance that they learn. One of the frustrating things from our perspective is knowing there are lots of blatant violations of civil liberties occurring, ones that clearly are inappropriate and unconstitutional and could be corrected, but people don't know that they have a remedy, and they don't contact an organization like the ACLU, and so these problems just fester and don't get resolved. So one key aspect of our work, we're mostly known for our litigation activities. Everybody knows, the ACLU rushing into court, trying to get a court order, and it is a key part of our work. But education is also a very important component. We don't do enough of it. We need to do more. But making people aware of what their rights are is also a very key element of taking care of it, because a lot of the violations of civil liberties that occur are totally preventable.
Now, are you the kind of guy that people either love or hate to go out with? Like, are you out in public and something happens and you're like, this is a violation of their civil liberties?
Yes, I get it. I get it from both ends. I also get a lot of thumbs down from people, but yeah, I mean, the ACLU is a controversial organization. There's no question about it. We take on controversial issues. And it's something that just comes with the territory. I mean, the whole idea of a Bill of Rights is that there are certain inalienable rights that protect the minority, protect people, however unpopular they may be, however controversial they are. They, as individuals, have certain rights that the government can't take away. And so that, the majority often can take care of itself because they're the majority.
Mhm.
So the whole idea behind the Bill of Rights is to protect individuals who may be out there, left field, right field, whatever, but they deserve certain fundamental rights that no government should be able to take away from them.
Now, can you toot your own horn for a little while and tell us, the role that ACLU has played when it comes to debates and issues like immigration or voting rights or criminal justice reform?
Sure. Well, the ACLU itself, not just in Rhode Island, but nationally, has a very storied history of being involved in some of the most impactful cases that have created or protected rights that we take for granted now, but that were very controversial at the time. Nationally, probably the best example that many people aren't aware of, the Scopes monkey trial, which most people know about, the challenge to evolution in the Deep South in the 1920s. That case was handled by Clarence Darrow, the famous attorney, and he did it as an ACLU volunteer attorney. So, the ACLU has a history going back a century now in defending civil liberties. And, you pick just about any major Supreme Court case that deals with civil rights or civil liberties, and the ACLU was probably involved. And the same thing is true here in Rhode Island. One thing when I talk to people about the ACLU generally, I like to mention a few examples. For example, if there are any women in the audience, are you married, but do you use your birth name on your driver's license? The ACLU had to file a lawsuit in the 1970s because it was the DMV's position that a married woman could only use her husband's name on a driver's license. And the ACLU had to go into court. Now, nobody thinks about it twice anymore, but it was a very controversial case at the time. A second one I'll give, and then I'll stop, is, have you ever been to a protest at the State House? In the 1970s, again, the Rotunda, the State House banned any sorts of protests or demonstrations at the State House. And the ACLU filed a lawsuit arguing that the First Amendment guaranteed people to go to the people's house, the State House, and be able to express their views. And the court issued a favorable decision. And as a result of that decision, the State House was opened up for public activity, demonstrations, rallies, protests, whatever. Again, everybody takes that for granted, but it took a lawsuit by the ACLU to make sure that that right was there.
Wow, ACLU has been doing work.
Yeah.
Wow.
Who funds the ACLU?
Well, not surprising, since we're always suing the government, we don't get any funds from the government. So we rely on donations, on memberships. We're a membership organization. We also get donations from individuals who support our work. That's where most of our money comes from. People who want to see this work continue and know that we need money in order to do it all. I should say that a lot of our work is done by volunteers. All of our legal work is done by cooperating attorneys. We have some of the best attorneys in the state volunteer their time to handle cases for us. So we're very lucky in that regard. But it really takes a lot of people to do all the work that we end up doing.
When I was on your
Donations are welcome.
so when I was on your website, there was a lot of donation buttons, and that kind of blew my mind because I was like, well, shouldn't the government fund the ACLU? I know you're battle with them a lot, but wouldn't they want to be fair to their people? Like, wouldn't they want to make sure there was a backup to make sure they were being, so that's, I'm interested in that. Interesting.
If only.
Right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Who watches the watcher?
Exactly. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
I'm still mind blown over the license thing, that was a case, because I just went on. I'm just thinking in life that, yeah, you have your choice. You can either keep your maiden name or your married name.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was an ACLU case. That's wow.
I do get
Yep.
peeved every time I have to do something. I have to prove that I'm married to my husband. Like, my birth certificate isn't enough. And I get it because I have a different name, but that's not an ACLU case. It's just my own personal peeve. He doesn't have to prove he's married to me.
That's it. That's right.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, how does the ACLU work to balance individual freedoms and community safety, particularly in cases involving law enforcement and public policy?
Mm.
Well, I think a key point that we like to emphasize is there should not be, and it doesn't have to be, any sort of conflict between community safety and protecting civil rights and civil liberties. In fact, just the opposite. I mean, one of the problems with having, strong police policies against individuals is that it creates mistrust, particularly in communities of color. You have all these unfortunate interactions between police and members of the community, and the impact is bad for everybody because you have people who don't want to cooperate with the police and have reasons not to want to cooperate with the police because of the way they've been treated. So, we really think that there needs to be a much broader, a less aggressive posture by police in doing their work. It does not have to be as confrontational as it often is. The other thing is that you also see a lot of this tough on crime legislation. I talked about what came out of the 1986 Constitutional Convention, and if you take a close look at a lot of this tough on crime stuff, whether it's denying the right to bail, imposing lengthy mandatory minimum sentences, they have absolutely no effect whatsoever or no positive effect on the crime rate. They cost taxpayers millions of dollars. They don't make us any safer. So it's really important to look at all these proposals to get tough on crime and see whether they really are doing anything good. Because more often than not, when you hear politicians talking about we need stronger public safety, it's political. It's not really substantive in terms of its impact.
Have you guys been doing anything to advance racial justice, racial equality in Rhode Island?
Yeah, we do a lot in that area. I mean, we certainly do litigation. In fact, right now we're in a couple of weeks we're going to be filing a lawsuit on behalf of an individual, a Black individual, who was twice arrested by a police officer and sent to the ACI, detained at the ACI, based on acknowledged bogus charges that he'd been involved in a break-in. The police officer knew it wasn't true, but arrested him twice anyway. The police department has now acknowledged that, and so we're going to try to get some relief for this individual who was harmed greatly by it. So we file a number of lawsuits like that. We're also involved in a lot of legislation that deals with racial justice issues, either directly or indirectly. We've been pressing for repassage of a law that Rhode Island had in effect for on and off for almost 15 years, dealing with racial profiling. Rhode Island was the first state in the country to pass a law back in 2000 requiring every police department to document its traffic stops. Who they were stopping, why they were stopping them, what was the result of the stop, and particularly the race of the driver, as a way of finding out how serious this problem of racial profiling is. It's a problem that police departments say doesn't exist, but it's a problem that the statistics have routinely, uniformly proved happens time and time again. Unfortunately, the data collection law that Rhode Island passed expired a few years ago, and we've been working to get it reinstated because it's really important for both the community and police departments to know what they're doing when it comes to traffic stops and try to address the clear disproportionate impact that those stops have on individuals of color. So those are just a couple of examples. I could give lots more, but those are a few.
Now, how does the ACLU engage with lawmakers and the legal system for civil rights to be upheld?
Well, as I mentioned before, litigation is something that most people associate with the ACLU. We do handle a lot of cases. I mean, we get many more complaints than we're able to handle, frankly. But so we try to pick cases that will have a greater impact on the law and on people. So it's not just the one person who may be a plaintiff who gets relief, but it will affect a larger number of people so that we try to target things. But one thing that certainly has occurred in the last couple of decades, especially as the courts have become much more conservative, is we do spend a lot more time in the legislature than we used to. It's not enough to be able to go into court to vindicate rights because you're not sure that you will be able to vindicate them. So we spend a lot of time at the legislature doing two things. First, trying to get good laws passed that strengthen and protect civil rights and civil liberties, and try to prevent bad laws from being passed so we don't have to go into court and challenge them. So that is now a very essential aspect of our work, and it's been extremely important as the courts have gotten more and more conservative.
When would ACLU get involved? Just going off of your answer, does someone have to come to you? Do you have to hear about the case as it's going on? Not only when do you know when to select one, but when does ACLU get involved?
Yeah, good question. So it depends. I mean, first of all, the ACLU is not some sort of roving litigator. We don't have the right to just see a violation and go into court. Under court rules, you need somebody who has what's known as standing, somebody who is directly affected by whatever it is that you're challenging. So we're not able to do it on our own. We have to have somebody or an entity that is directly being affected by whatever the violation is that's occurring. So a large portion of our docket comes from individuals contacting us saying, this happened to me. We investigate it, we look at it, and we say, they have a valid claim. It raises an important issue, and we should do something about it. Now, there are occasions when we do hear about something, and in those instances, it's possible, depending on what the issue is, that we'll try to reach out to the person to make sure they know what their rights are, to ask them if they might be interested in challenging what's going on, and take it from there. And then also sometimes, for example, in the legislative arena, if the legislature passes a law that we think is blatantly unconstitutional, we may talk with other people who share our concerns and ask them if they can find individuals who are affected by this new law so that we can challenge it on their behalf. So those are the major ways we end up in litigation. But sometimes, yeah, it comes just from somebody writing in a letter saying this happened to me, and we say, you've got a legitimate issue.
All right.
So we heard about the Bill of Rights for the unhoused.
Mhm.
How do you reach out to marginalized communities and educate them on their rights?
Well, we don't do enough of that to
Okay.
start with. We should do more. We certainly have a lot of connections with groups in the community who advocate on these issues. I mean, the unhoused issue is a great example. I mean, we're not on the ground. We're not dealing directly with the individuals who are affected by homelessness, but we work with organizations like House of Hope, the Rhode Island Coalition for to End Homelessness, to to find out what's going on and to serve as a resource to them to help their constituencies that we may not be dealing with directly. As I mentioned earlier, we also try to do a lot of know your rights activity, whether it's appearing at events, we're invited to explain to people what their rights are. We have a large number of materials on our website, Know Your Rights materials, in a variety of contexts that, again, we try to encourage people to go to. It's a never-ending effort. And as I said, it's something we always need to do more of. But those are some of the ways we do try to get information out to communities that might not otherwise be aware of what their rights are.
Now, looking to the future, what are some of ACLU's top priorities, or what do you perceive would be some of the ACLU's top priorities in the next few years?
Well, again, I emphasize that the ACLU is nonpartisan, but I think how civil liberties fare in the next few years will depend a lot on the outcome of the November 5th election. So we're going to have to wait and see where that leads. I think that will help determine what may be some of the key issues that we're going to have to deal with in the next few years. But for the most part, the other one would be technology issues. I mean, this is something that's not going away. It's going to get more complicated. Technology is way outpacing legislation. I mean, one of the real problems is there is no legislation controlling all this new technology, and it's only getting worse. And I think you'll see the ACLU, both locally and nationally, spending a lot more time trying to get things under control when it comes to all this new technology and its potential impact on civil liberties. I think another thing that is conditioned on what happens in November is if there is a constitutional convention approved. I'm sure we'll be spending the next few years dealing with the outcome of that convention and fighting some of the amendments that come out of that process. That will be a battle for a couple of years. But I think the bottom line also is most of the issues just stay the same. I mean, we are fighting many of the same battles that the National ACLU was fighting in its founding, 100 years ago. There are always attempts by government to squelch freedom of speech. Police misconduct has been with us ever since there have been police. These are recurring problems, and the ACLU is going to have to continue to fight them. The ACLU's founder was a man named Roger Baldwin, and he said, "No battle for civil liberties ever stays won." And he's absolutely right. Every victory we have is a temporary victory because we know there will be efforts to undermine it one way or another, and we need to be prepared to fight the same battle again.
Do you have a passion? Is there something that when it comes into the ACLU, you're like, I want to do it. I want to take care of it.
Yeah, there's no question. I wouldn't have been able to do this as long as I have if I didn't have a passion. It just bothers me to the core to see people who have power, government officials, abuse that power for their own ends and harm, basic human rights. So that does keep me going. It's what gets me out of bed. I mean, it's also very frustrating. I think I've expressed that a few times during our conversation. But yes, it does drive me.
Now, I want to ask, for people who want to get in contact with the ACLU, how to do so. But I also want to bring up something you mentioned before about standing. When someone does write in or request ACLU's help, are there like benchmarks or key phrases that need to be hit or need to be noted so that they could maybe jump up in the ranks of disability?
Yeah, not real. I mean, we don't have any formal criteria on what constitutes a case that we'll handle. I mean, it is very individualized. As I said, we're trying to figure out what impact would filing a suit have beyond the individual. Generally we need to shy away from cases that are very fact intensive, where there are lots of disputed facts, as opposed to legal issues. So I mean, a simple example would be somebody who feels that they were discriminated at work on the basis of their sex. They're probably, in most of those cases, it's probably a he said, she said sort of thing. Whether it actually was on the basis of sex that they were fired or disciplined. On the other hand, you sometimes have cases where an employer says no women can take this job, or you're pregnant, we're not going to hire you. So when they have policies like that, where it's very clear, you don't have these factual disputes, those are the types of cases we're more likely to get involved in.
Got it.
And so if people are interested in learning more about their rights
Or donating.
or definitely donating, they should go to, is it ACLU.org?
Well, that's the national
Okay.
website. If you want to go to our website, it's RIACLU.org.
Okay.
And there you will find really a lot of information, know your rights materials. There's a button to donate, which we encourage people to hit. But there is a lot of factual information there. We encourage people to scroll through it, to search it. You will find a lot of information that is probably helpful, especially if there's a particular issue that you're involved in and want to know more about what your rights are. We do encourage people to take a look at our website.
Hey, feel
Great.
more informed.
Yeah, I think I found my next job.
Yeah. We're going to be knocking on your door, Steve, if you're ready.
Okay.
Well, we would just want to thank you very much for your time and being our guest here on Totally Preventable. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
I appreciate the offer. Thank you.
Take care. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.